You're training every day. It's very not sexy. You show up and suffer basically for 10 years so that maybe you're going to win a medal. That's not normal. What drives that? It's the same with founders.
I'm Jake Aaron Villarreal, born and raised in Silicon Valley, here to take you behind the scenes to share what it's like to be a startup founder, the journey they're on, the problems they face, the products they build in an effort to make our lives better. I'm excited to have with us today Ben Orthlieb, co-founder and general partner of Blue Moon. Ben, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jake.
Well, Ben, thanks for jumping on here. Before we dive into your story and the company you're building, where are you joining us from today?
Marin County. North San Francisco.
Really cool. Love that area. A lot going on. The next couple of weeks, there's a lot of AI conferences happening, and it seems like it's always happening these days, but really cool. Well, a little bit more about Blue Moon, which I think is very interesting because our audience is predominantly VC, really, I would say a lot of startups, but a lot more AI startups now.
Of course.
And in that, everyone's at different stages. Some are at seed, some are at A, some are farther down the path. But Blue Moon is a seed stage venture fund that's flipping the script on how VCs actually work. Ben spent years at LinkedIn in a leadership position before realizing most VCs run themselves like spreadsheets. So he built something different, a fund that can screen 20,000 companies a year or more, make a dozen investments or more, and asks founders about their life instead of just metrics. The result, a fund that massively outperforms the market. So really excited to jump in. If you are a founder, if you are looking at seed investment, this is an episode for you. Listen all the way to the end to get all the value you can out of this. Before we go any deeper, Ben, give us a little background of you. And you were at LinkedIn, you spent some time at big corporate companies as well, got into the capital side of things. But what was some of those early experiences that shaped you into doing what you do today?
Yeah. So I'm originally from France. You'll probably hear that in my accent. Very lovely town in the south, not that many jobs. And maybe the first experience that shapes what I do today is, so basically went through engineering. So I'm a system engineer by training. I actually was building neural networks before it was really cool in 99, 2000. And then switched over because I got curious about finance and investments and ultimately went down the path with a mixed path between banking and consulting, where I was always at the cross of finance and strategy in a tech environment. That led me to, fast forwarding a number of years here, it led me to LinkedIn through various roles actually at LinkedIn, business operations for product strategy, then focusing on the marketing business for LinkedIn. And then finally, because of my experiences, as well as my investment and involvement in the tech ecosystem and startup ecosystem, ultimately took over what LinkedIn calls corporate development, which is traditionally M&A, but also includes investments and elements of corporate strategy, which is what I've been doing for the last 5+ years out of my 10 years at LinkedIn.
Wow, that's great. There's a lot that goes into that when it comes to corporate development and acquisitions. And I know the number is very high, even when you invest in companies that they can get acquired. So we'll maybe touch on that as well as a strategy, as you grow. But talk a little bit more about you're at LinkedIn. You decided to make a change. What was the big breakthrough, or what was the decision in your mind that you said, you know what, I think now is the time to do something different and really specifically focus on venture?
There's a number of sort of signals down along the path where I really got curious even about startup investing is probably around 2014, 2015, right? So remember, I come from France originally. I came to the US via banking. I was in consulting, was doing M&A related and strategy related stuff. I didn't really get exposed to a startup investing venture until I stumbled upon it because I live in San Francisco. Some of my friends become founders or were founders. I invest on a relationship basis, and then they raise a Series A, a Series B, and you've got to understand or at least I got curious about understanding what was going on. That's maybe the first step. A couple other instances is obviously started working and met my co-founder, who's also French, also in the venture ecosystem from his job, and got curious about how can we use data to understand better the ecosystem. That in parallel to starting to work at LinkedIn with the data science team. There we were looking at what are signals of startup success. And there was some interesting metrics that come up. Everything after Series B is sort of an operational nature. So how fast you grow, where you hire from, those types of things are indeed very predictive. And in fact, I think at this point, Series B plus is becoming way more of a science than an art. The interesting conclusion for what led to Blue Moon is before that, basically seed, pre-seed, Series A, the main thing that matters is actually people. LinkedIn will never go down the path of like scoring your profile or my profile. And so that was the limit of the research. But the old saying that basically the only signal that you really have at seed is the founders was holding completely true. And that got me thinking a lot more about how do you evaluate founders first and foremost when you do investments, as I was starting to ramp up my own angel investing. And then the real catalyst of all this is in 2020, because of my investments, because of my interest, because of the fact that my day job was to talk to founders all day long, I started a conversation with Emergence Capital and eventually became a scout for them, working closely with Jason Green at the time, one of the co-founders of Emergence.
Yeah.
Really that is cool. Basically what got us started.
And as you looked at the market and you said, I understand what's happening, you're kind of in it, you're doing investments, but you're seeing how investments work and how you evaluate companies. And what was it you thought could be done differently that is just not happening today? And you talk about looking at building a fund really with more of a DNA around technology, not just a services or marketing arm to going out and getting companies. Walk through that.
Well, the idea is this, VCs talk a lot about technology. We're back in 2020, 2021. Talk a lot about technology. At the early stages, most of them use Affinity, which is a spreadsheet with a Gmail connector. Effectively, venture uses very technology for itself. At the time, and now is true as well, the world doesn't need an extra seed fund that does exactly the same as others. And frankly, our view was like the traditional way of sourcing, relying on your network. Ooh, I've got a little niche that maybe gives me a few deal flow every year wasn't going to be enough. And so we figured from the get-go, two things. We're going to build as a technology company. We just happen to monetize as a fund, but ultimately we see ourselves as a technology company. And despite doing all that technology in the background, the core of the conversation goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's really just all about the founders. What drives their obsession? What is their resistance to pain? And so we do all these technology so that we can have very human conversations with the founders about their backgrounds, their upbringing, their family. And that's where we take the ultimate decision.
Yeah. If you're a VC fund or firm, you might be thinking, well, we understand the metrics because we've been doing this for years. We understand the data and we can make decisions based on that have been successful. Talk about the variable insights that you get when you talk to a founder about their upbringing, about their parents, about their childhood, about, really the makeup of their character. Like, how can that make a better decision when it comes to investing in a startup?
Maybe the best sort of parallel story to illustrate this is the 2012 Olympics in London, which my daughter wants to be an Olympian, so that's also been forefront. But 2012, the Olympic Games were in London. When London wins the bid, they put together a committee with basically the task of, hey, UK has been underperforming GDP and population results, basically forecast results, through the 80s and the 90s. We're going to host the Olympics. How do we not look bad? They put a group together. Long story short, they changed two main things. One, they went to source much more broadly than usual. So it wasn't just your regional leagues and things like that. They were looking for athletes on a much broader scale. Two, super relevant to the question, is it used to be your national ranking was the only thing that sort of mattered in this ability to get selected. They shifted this to say, now you need to pass a bar, right? VO2 max, for example, is a clear metric of your cardio health. You need to have a minimum VO2 max if you're going to play basketball, minimum height, those type of things. But ultimately, that was just a filter. You needed to, quote unquote, pass the bar. Where they really selected the athletes was through a bunch of conversation with psychologists to figure out who has the grit to go through the training. You're training to be an Olympian, that takes 10 years. You're training every day. It's very not sexy. You show up and suffer basically for 10 years so that maybe you're going to win a medal. That's not normal. What drives that? It's the same with founders. And actually, there's lots of sort of parallels between the profiles of founder and the profile of Olympians. You're becoming a founder, sometimes a repeat founder. You actually know what you're getting into. It's painful for 10 years or more if you're really successful. And that's what we're trying to figure out. What drives that obsession and willingness to go through pain for 10 years so that you're going to be successful?
Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, that is, what's interesting is it resonates a lot with founders. they understand that at these early stages, sure, they have a product, they have a little bit of sales, but they know they're going to pivot. What's interesting, you need to be in a good space, but you don't know what your product will be in 5 years. So all the founders know that intuitively, that it's about them. Honestly, 90% plus of those conversations, they tell us they've never had these kinds of conversations with any VC. They've never
Wow.
shared their relationship with their dad, or what happened to their siblings, or why they're competing with their siblings. All these stories that explain that obsession and that drive, nobody asks them.
Well, it's one thing to ask the questions. It's another thing to get people to talk. Talk about your
Yes.
co-founder.
So my co-founder first career was, he was a diplomat, French diplomat, and he wasn't a spy, but he was trained in intelligence techniques for some of the negotiations he was leading, literally around war and peace treaties. So he's very good at getting people to talk. We have systems that effectively go do a whole bunch of research on people before we talk to the founders in that second phase of our process. So we show up very prepared, or he shows up very prepared. And then he's looking for patterns in the conversation, how to steer the conversation so that we can get to the heart of the founder motivation. Sometimes, and it's not one size fits all, it cannot be, right? Because those end up being very personal stories. But sometimes it's very stark, what's driving them, and sometimes it's less obvious. Usually, we tend to know very quickly after those meetings. We usually take a first step decision, let's say, after the meeting, and then we sort of revisit the next day, and we're able to sort of take a decision very quickly from there. And in a few cases, like more recently, it brings up a few more questions that we go and sort of evaluate and make our final decision. But ultimately, by the time we get there, our system found them and screened them positively based on their backgrounds. I've met with them, and I like, with the use of a whole bunch of AI to give me information, what they're building, their space. So we have a full analysis of what they do. The round is becoming interesting, right? We're just a small check, 250K. So for us, who else is at the table matters, because adverse selection is clearly a thing. You can see it in the data. It's pretty obvious. But once you've got all of this, those are gates. It's the same thing as the Olympics committee that I was talking to you about. It's like, great, you've met the bar. Now, what are you about that we get conviction of backing you?
Yeah, that's really cool. I like the motivation aspect. In some ways, I mean, we're in the recruitment business and a lot of it's very similar. You know, when you're trying to understand somebody, you have to understand their full story. And when you
Yes.
understand their story, what drives them, what motivates them, what's their specialty and why could they be a fit? What's the upside? And you're really trying to drive down into the details, but you have to have the conversations. It's a people business. And just like what you're doing, you're investing in people. The technology is great what they're building, the innovation, but really behind
Yeah.
behind the technology is the people. And if you get that wrong, you're probably not going in the right direction.
We spend more on technology than what an associate would probably cost us. But thanks through that, we do so much more. But again, ultimately, it is about having those conversations. The biggest compliment we got probably 3 or 4 weeks ago was a founder told us, I feel very seen with you guys.
Mm.
And the specific reaction, we were already 20, 30 minutes into a conversation. So we've already talked a lot about her past relationship with her mom. Actually, that was super important to her. But she had written a short movie 15 years ago, and we'd actually seen it.
Mm.
She was basically flabbergasted, really, that we were like, wait, how did you dig that up? And you guys actually went through it and you have relevant questions. It's crazy. But yeah, that's the type of preparation that we go into that part with.
Talk about the numbers. 20,000 is a lot. You use
Yeah.
technology to do the tracking, the screening, the qualification. Walk us through the process. What's that look like?
Yeah. Our view actually, which leads to the numbers and which numbers are important. Our view is there's a couple of things that really matter, is the coverage, which means what's the either full sort of size of the deal flow or the percentage of deals that you see that end up being done by good funds at the end of the day. That's how most top funds measure themselves at seed. What's their coverage with, like, at least for the efficacy of their sourcing. And then ultimately, if you do your job in the middle well, which I'll assume for most people, then it's about winning deals. Those are the key metrics in our models to performance. Because if you find great founders, but you don't win, then your whole process is not useful. Coverage. So we use I'll start with screening because it explains how we can scale sourcing. Screening, which is where we started back in 2020, 2021, we use machine learning to evaluate founders completely outside it. It's not Gen AI. It's not, let me teach Claude what I like in a founder and sort of all the sort of variability that comes from that. It's not a point system. She's like, oh, you went to Stanford or MIT, 5 points, you didn't, what else, etc. It's pure brute force machine learning on people's experiences. That, if you abstract what that says, it leads to 7 or 8 pockets of founding teams that tend to be more successful. And so what we get is effectively an evaluation of like, are you close to one of those pockets of teams that tend to be more successful? Once you have that, you don't need an army of people to review deal flow. And by the way, it's way more actually predictive and replicable because, it doesn't change on the mood, or you're doing this at 2 a.m. You're just got a dump in your email and you have to check out all these founders like speed dating in 30 seconds. Once you have that, you can source from a whole lot of places. So of course we, traditional inbounds from network, etc., which leads us to about the same volume as everyone else, which is sort of 1,000 to 3,000 leads. We get to somewhere between 15 and 20,000. We're past 8,000 for the year. That comes from about 15 different data sources. Again, we're a little obsessed ourselves and we think about it as a tech company. And so any idea that we have had over time to improve our deal flow, we've tested it and put it into production. Of course, everything that's public, all the accelerators, sometimes before they publish the batch, all the, AngelList, Traction, Crunchbase, we get all these signals. We have some others, which is we have a list of over 40,000 people that we follow on a regular basis to check if something seems like they're building a company. Everyone we're second degree connected on LinkedIn who says they're a founder, we automatically analyze, etc. This first pass leads to 15 to 20,000 teams that look like seed B2B North America, which is what we do. And then from there, I guess our system, our algo tells us for the 400 or 500 teams that you should probably spend time with this year.
So it actually is narrowing it down for you. And then talk about the numbers once you've got that algorithm that's telling you where to focus. What's the next step? I mean, you got to get on calls. You got to talk to people.
Yeah.
What's that volume look like? How do you manage that?
Yeah. Maybe there's one step, which is there's about 2,000 seed deals, seed B2B North America every year. So 20,000 is way more than what actually ends up being done. And so the metric that everybody tracks for good reasons is coverage. With our 20,000, we get to a coverage of about 70%, meaning at the end of the year, we've seen 70% of the deals that ended up being done by a top seed fund, top 50 fund in the year. If you ask traditional funds, good ones with very good brands, they will tell you their coverage is about 30%. So through data, we're able to basically have 2.5 times the coverage, not just the pure volume, but the actual coverage of deals that get done from top funds. As you said, the trick then is talk to them. And given we find them, we're mostly an outbound motion. Our ability to find you, Jake, and talk to you, Jake, so conversion from finding to talking to a first meeting is 70%.
Wow,
And
that's high.
what's interesting. Yeah, it's very high. Most VC outbound is in the 30% from what friends tell us. What's very interesting that we found along the way, right? I mean, we're iterating all the time and learning all the time, is that being a tech company, quote unquote, is very useful. We reach out with an email that would say, Jake, I found you with my AI. She's already produced an analysis of your company. Here it is. And oh, by the way, I already have a few questions to ask in our few meetings. The number of founders who are like, oh, this is so cool. Go, Agatha. Those are the questions that I'm asking myself. And 3, in this day and age, I'm building with AI. I need more people around me that are doing the same. And you seem like one of them. And so that cold email conversion is crazy. And when that doesn't work, we then ask our networks for introductions. And the reason people do it, partially just good karma, but also we're very close to a lot of VCs because we have so much deal flow and we don't lead. We share deal flow with a lot of funds. And so, of course, when I ask for an intro and you've made some investments or you've seen interesting companies that I shared with you, people are very willing to help. It takes a couple of minutes because on our side, it's all automated. So they can get all the sort of forwardables and everything they need.
So if you invest in a company, $250,000, what do you give them? Companies have multiple options to take funds from lots of organizations. Sounds like you got a good connection with the VC firms. I'm assuming like all the big VC firms out there. Maybe there's some introductions. Maybe there's
pretty much
taking them to that next level. What other value do you give them that, say, other traditional funds might not give them?
Yeah. It's very interesting because our win rate is basically 95% plus. In the first fund, we've made 50 investments. We've been told no twice. There's a company that I'm still waiting to hear, so I don't know if it's a no or not, but it's basically 2 or 3 no's in the span of 5 to 6 years. So it is an incredible win rate. Where we started was traditional. And so we pay for some services outsourced. So you get an exec coach who has 3 exit, you get a program for engineers, mentorship, sales coaching, a few other things. A key piece, as you've mentioned, is the intros. Because we're a small fund, but we're very highly connected, we're able to make lots of intros. So we tend to talk to people early. They don't necessarily have a lead. I've got a whole system that helps me reach out to potential leads or co-investors, which means last year we've made 278 intros between founders and VCs. And so I reach out to you. We have a first chat. Of course, you don't really know Blue Moon. If I like what you do, within a week, you get 5 or 6 intros to top VCs. All of a sudden, you're like, wow, Ben's really effective. That will be helpful for my Series A and my Series B, which is also where we help. So that's the second sort of place where we help. And the third one is, I think you've mentioned this a couple of times, but 92% of exits actually are, turns out that used to be my day job. And so I know exactly how the tactics happen, how the workflow happens, not just purely like, hey, talk to a banker or anything like that. I get into the nitty gritty with founders from, hey, I got an inbound from a company to helping them through negotiation. It turns out those are nice, but that's not why we win ultimately. Why we win is much more emotional, which we found again along the way. It wasn't by design, but they love the fact that we were effectively builders. They love the tech that we show them because they haven't seen this from a VC. Forget in 2021, but even still in 2026, they're like, wow, this is sort of crazy good. In fact, some VCs are actually getting it from us. They're getting technology from us. Very well-known VCs. 2, they absolutely love the conversation about them. Of course, the context is a 250K check. So I'm not here to win the lead position, which would be crazy for a whole sort of reason. I'm here to win an allocation in the 50% that the leads usually don't take. Once you've had this conversation where they tell us what happened to them in their childhood or versions of that, you became pretty close and they absolutely love that. And so this whole package with the intros, the demonstration, the value add, plus the personal connection, when a couple of days later we say we want to invest, it's never really a question.
Yeah, I like that. Well, you're good at getting companies and having the conversations, success rates in converting that. How hard is it to stay disciplined and not want to go upstream and start cutting bigger checks if you really feel good about an opportunity? Like, is there a challenge there for you? Because it looks like you got the volume. It looks like you're hitting the target with the right kind of companies, the right kind of founders. You're at 250. Do you have an interest of going higher than that?
It's a great business model question. If I go back to the things that matter is coverage. We're always doing better, but we've sort of solved the problem. We can always improve, but we're always looking at it. But okay, problem solved. I don't want to compromise the win rate. And it's the other thing in the middle. Blue Moon, as much as I love it, is not a VC brand yet. If I were to compete against Sequoia to deploy a 2 million check in your seed, why would a founder take me? And it actually would be, honestly, I'd be concerned if I was to win because maybe I have differentiated deal flow. Is that really 12 investments a year where you're like, I see something that none of the top funds can see? I don't actually believe that. Collectively, the top funds see everything and they're actually very good pickers. I mean, I track that data very closely to even know who I want to co-invest with. There is something there. It might just be the brand that's become self-fulfilling, but the top funds are top funds for a reason. And so me competing would be crazy because I don't have a brand versus me co-investing with your Sequoia, your NFX, your first round is actually cherry picking from their collective portfolio. And it turns out our metrics, and in particular graduation rate, is better than theirs. So if you think about this for a whole bunch of reasons, top funds do perform better. And then with our process, we're able to overperform from a graduation rate standpoint. And frankly, from another metric standpoint, so far in the first one, TVPI, DPI, we're able to overperform. And so that's the key to your question of like, how much can you invest? My answer is as much as I can without losing my ability to win and be in the right deals.
Yeah. Well, you talked about you're building a technology company and really funded by your investments. So I guess the question becomes, how quickly do those investments have to start paying off for the model to work?
It's a very good question. No one has asked that before. Well, there's a couple of things. One is, does it pay off operationally? And the reality is the volume of deal flow, conversations, analysis that we're able to do is incredibly high for a fund as small as ours. I honestly don't understand how most solo GPs even run. And it's a compliment to them. Like, there's so much going on in the background. If anything, admin is crazy, which we're automating most of that. But even just like the time you have to spend on admin, working with your Carta or your angel list, and it's crazy. So we've got incredible leverage. No fund can do seed and show up to the founders the first time with an analysis of their company. It is just not scalable. We send them an analysis of their company before we even show up, which means our systems run analysis on 500 to 1,000 companies every year before we even reach out to them. That is just not doable. And those analysis we've built, just to be clear, this is not ChatGPT or Claude or whatever. Like, we've built a RAG for the last 3 years. We scrape 150 sources curated about early stage venture in B2B, which is what we do. The quality of these analysis is honestly mind-boggling, even though I know exactly how it works. And the same thing for every conversation, I get a 5-page memo based on the conversation after a conversation with founders. This is, again, something that is not basically doable if you're going to use mostly humans to do this. And the quality of just shipping it to ChatGPT or Claude is not good enough at this point. And so, is it worth it? Well, we do all these things, the volume, the analysis, more than honestly your top seed investors. You could say we could cut the spend, but then we'd be the same as every other fund.
Yeah.
And so, the real payoff, that was a long way to actually answer your question. The real payoff is in the returns. The first fund is doing very, very well. According to Carva, we're in the 0.1% funds for our vintage in 2021, which is a really bad vintage for venture in general. But we have about returned the money already, 1x DPI to all our initial investors, and the paper markup is close to 5x. So all of this to say, it will take time, but the payoff is, as with any fund who have been investing in AI in the last year or two, it needs to show up in the returns.
Yeah. Can you talk about some of the companies you've invested in that the listeners would know about?
The most famous one is probably Merkor. We invested at their seed, and they publicly raised at 10 billion in October. So that is, of course, a very, very high return. And what's interesting is it's textbook our model, how we got there. We found them because they were trending on Crunchbase. So we track Crunchbase not just for Crunchbase, but they actually have sort of pretty obscure traction metrics in the background. We found them actually. Anne at Village Global made the intro on that one because I saw it in my CRM in the morning. I was having lunch with her. She knew of them. She made an intro. We talked to them, which is interesting because they weren't actually at the time doing exactly what they're doing now. They were more going after the model of like, we'll find teams and build teams of engineers for you, sort of on a contract basis, when they quickly evolved into reinforcement learning, which is their business. The space was interesting, right? What was very interesting in the first conversation is our system screened them positively. At the time, there were there are 3 20-year-old dropouts from Georgetown. And this is B2B, right? It's not, it's a good sign maybe to have dropouts in B2C because they've seen a trend, they are in the know. Like, no, this is finding engineers, finding people in a B2B context. Our system saw them and scored them very highly. A lot of people, just because they're not the right background for traditionally these kind of jobs. So we found them, our system screens them positively, we talk to them, like what they're doing, comes the personal conversation. They are exceptional. In one of the easiest conversations or decisions we've had to make, Brendan himself basically started doing AWS consulting on nights and weekend when he was 13. He's not the only founder that we've backed that started at 13 doing sort of consulting or companies. But I mean, it's pretty exceptional.
That's young. Yeah.
I wasn't doing that when I was 13. And then a whole bunch of stories. He and his co-founder, so Brendan is dyslexic. He's talked about this to prove that this wasn't an impediment. He and his co-founders signed up for debate competitions and won the state championship 3 years in a row. Nobody's done that before. Nobody's done that since. And a whole bunch of stories like that. And honestly, you meet people like this and you're like, take my money. You can't give them to partially your question earlier, you have to stay disciplined. You can't just make one bet. You have to make, for the numbers to play out at seed, you have to do actually quite a few bets. But once you get past they don't have the traditional background and is what they're doing interesting or not, they were an obvious investment. Level of drive and obsession, it was just off the charts. And that's ultimately what we're looking for.
Yeah. Well, that's not going to show up on a resume. So you gotta sit down.
Or you have to have that conversation.
Yeah, 100%.
Because sometimes those conversations are flat with people that have excellent resumes, and it just doesn't work out for us.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Talk about your company. It's two of you. You've got a lot of technology running.
A whole bunch of agents.
Where has it gone when you started? Are you hitting breaking points yet within technology? Is the token funds, like, you're seeing significant increases in spend? I mean, I think the big question we get a lot of right now is, I'm building agents, I've got tokens running. I hope there's an output that's actually, an ROI behind what we're trying to get done within our company, but how to manage it, how to make sure that we're not overspending in areas that don't make sense. Like, what's working for you?
What I think is different, and we help a lot of bigger funds on that journey. Again, some of them actually get our tech, like our analysis on companies. A few companies have that through APIs, things like that, other funds. What I think has been key for us and makes us different, I think, sustainably, is the people we're building are the people who are operating the fund. And so we can be very quickly testing things and evaluating, is this worth the output? Is this worth the tokens? Because ultimately, the tokens spend is money we cannot pay ourselves. And trust me, it's tight. And so we only do things if it makes sense. We test a lot of things. We have a vision of where we want to go. We had a vision of what we wanted to build. In the last 2-3 years completed, I would say, that first sort of vision, which is at this point, everything from sourcing, we've talked about portfolio management, has technology, and at this point, AI that gives us incredible leverage. But the building and testing and doing food dogging or dog fooding, all the time is crazy important for us. And then frankly, once we get to a system that works, like I was talking about our RAG, very complicated, like actually tricky to build something that performs very well for what we're doing. And then you can replace the models, because once you've built the infrastructure, changing models is actually super easy. Mm-hmm. And so every time there's a new model, we can test, okay, does this become significantly better from a whole bunch of perspective versus how much we use? And in fact, what we found is once we like something and it's close enough, or it's not crazy on a cost amount, because the costs go down so quickly, it's actually oftentimes worth it to keep going. And so, yeah, we're a small fund. We probably spend the equivalent of an associate salary on all our tech, and we have incredible leverage. So in the aggregate, it's totally worth it.
Yeah.
But I think it is the question that you were asking, like, are you building for the sake of building, or are you seeing the direct impact on your investment, which is the core of what we do, that influences what you do, what you drop, what you try? And we've seen a lot of funds having issues where they hire a developer, there's probably adverse selection already there, because working for a fund as a developer is not necessarily the sexiest thing you could do in the world, but some people have passion, but the developer is not in the workflow of the investments. The other challenge is most firms, because they've developed over time, each GP is his or her own island. And so a lot of times we're seeing an issue where it's like, I've got 4 GPs, they all want something very different. And so either I build the minimum that can help them, but is actually not that super helpful, or I need to convince them to start standardizing the way they do things, which is very hard because successful funds have been successful. And so people don't really see the impetus to change, again, beyond, let me be a little bit more operationally efficient. So a little bit of sourcing, a little bit of like, I'm going to teach Claude my scoring system so it can screen the exact same way I'm doing, as opposed to, can I use AI to actually improve my results? Things like that. So we're in that phase where people are trying to figure out what they can do with AI. Some of it is just a little bit of feel good and marketing, versus do you go all the way to re-architecting your company to perform better? The latter is very, very hard and costly. I mean,
yeah, we're in the middle of it right now, which is why I asked the questions.
Yeah.
Really cool. Well, exciting about what you're creating. I'm assuming that if you've got systems that go out there and can track really a lot of companies that are in that pre-seed stage and beyond or earlier, what should founders out there be doing that will show up in your algorithm? Where do they need to be so that you might see them? And if not, how do they find you, or how do they find Blue Moon?
Finding Blue Moon is easy. It's blue-moon.vc. So that's easy. we're getting more inbounds because we're in the sort of Crunchbase list of active investors, etc. That's discovery. That way is easy. I was thinking about this morning. The question is, do you put stealth or do you actually just say what you're working on? I capture people both ways, but I find it as an investor using a lot of AI more useful when the screening will be the same because it's independent of what you do. So it's not why I was screening you positively or not, but it actually, honestly, I think saves founders time if they say what they're doing, because then VCs will not reach out if they're obviously not a fit, which may not be obvious if you're just staying in stealth. And stealth is still exciting for VCs for a lot of reasons. And so I know people put stealth oftentimes not to be bothered, but I actually think people who quietly say, here's my company and here's what it does, but without making a big fanfare of it, they probably get much more qualified inbound than if you just say you're stealth and you are coming from a sexy company or a sexy sort of university background.
Yeah, makes sense. I agree with putting it out there. These people know what you do and they can help you. Last question for you. If you were to restart this company today, what would you have done differently, if anything?
Interesting. Well, there's things we've learned along the way. And so maybe you can argue some of that learning could have come faster. So year 2 is when we really started looking at what we call our anti-portfolio system. So we track all the companies we've evaluated, we've missed, why we passed, all these things. But year 2 is probably when we realized we were missing companies because our deal flow was not big enough. And that's where we got pretty obsessed about this question. At the time, we were probably 3,000 companies every year. We're now 5-6x that, but that could have happened earlier. And there's a few companies that we missed because of that. Another learning that, is part of the job, but will probably haunt me for a long time, is we passed on Perplexity's first round because pricing. There's good reasons, right? To 2022, 23, their round was at 90 million, which was not at all usual. Let's put it this way. Not that it's usual today, it's overblown, but it's more as a percentage of sort of rounds that is in that zip code. So we could have gotten in, we passed purely on pricing. Obviously they proved us wrong, but that's a little bit of our learning, which was more not that pricing doesn't matter, but you have to think about a little bit more flexibility basically. And frankly, the founders obsession, it's almost like it was in front of us because the machine learning, for example, is all about the founders. But let's go much deeper, and we have a secret weapon in my co-founder's sort of background and ability to do this. And so it's almost like it was in front of us the whole time, but it took us a while to really go deep in there. And then realizing that it's actually very helpful for our investment performance. You can differently see before and after. Two, that sort of reflexive thing that this makes us win more. Not that we had a win problem, to be honest, but the check was smaller and we could have maybe scaled faster. So those are the sort of learnings along the way. I would probably have picked a better brand from the get-go also, which we used to have a complicated name. And then we're very close to James Currier at NFX. And one day he sends an email and he's like, you got to change your name. And so he gave us a masterclass on venture branding. And then from there came Blue Moon. But that also, things you learn along the way.
Yeah, I got it. Well, really cool. Really exciting to have you on the show. And it's going to be very valuable for a lot of founders that are looking to get funded at some point. So thanks for joining, Ben. Appreciate your time. And for the listeners for listening, it means a lot to me. If you're out there and you've listened, do me a favor, hit subscribe. It's free. It helps us. We've actually grown like 1,012% in the last 45 days of subscribers. So continue to do that. It's happening for a reason. Content has gotten better. We've done a better job. We're accelerating how we operate with AI, which has been helpful. And ultimately, we're just trying to bring good stories that help everyone out there find their dream and do it with the right companies at the right times. I'm your host, Jake Aaron Villarreal, signing off for now, but can't wait to catch up with you all in the next episode. Until then, Ben, the world, take care. If you like what we're doing, don't forget to subscribe. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. And follow us on YouTube, where we go behind the scenes to learn what it takes to be a startup founder.